If you're studying for the bar exam right now and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, maybe stressed out, perhaps a little bit frustrated, don't worry. In this video, we're going to give you all kinds of tactics, strategies, other things you can consider implementing to hopefully get you back on track so you can enter the bar exam with confidence. Okay, so the first thing I would point out here is if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay, right? It's common. If we think about how this test is actually designed and how bar exam preparation works, I mean, we're talking about jamming like 2 years of law school curriculum, which is very rigorous and complex, doctorate level material. We're like taking all of this rigorous, complex material and jamming it into an 8 to 10 week study period, right? So we're taking a huge amount of material, giving you very little time to go through it all. And the stakes are ultra high, right? The bar exam stakes are high for most students. So of course, this is like a pressure cooker. This creates all kinds of anxiety. Of course, students are going to be overwhelmed. Again, it's just simple in that we have a ton of material, short period of time to get through it. So naturally, people are overwhelmed. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, the first thing to recognize is that's not necessarily a problem. The problem becomes when we let that feeling of being overwhelmed affect how we study. When we allow the feeling of being overwhelmed to basically result in us scoring less points on the bar exam, that's what we want to avoid. Because you can be overwhelmed, but still perform very effectively. Okay, and so the key here is to understand how we go from being overwhelmed to basically allowing that to affect how we study and ultimately score points on the bar exam. Because this cycle I'm about to lay out is like what we want to avoid. We don't want to allow this to happen. And so kind of the best way to avoid it is to understand it so we can like stay out of the cycle. And if we're in that cycle right now, we can break it. We can get out, okay? Because this is what you want to avoid. So the point is, it's okay to be overwhelmed, but we want to avoid this spiral, this vicious cycle I'm about to lay out. Okay, so typically, and I kind of have it drawn up here, just walk through it. So typically we start off being overwhelmed. That's understandable. We have to get through a huge amount of material in a short period of time, so we're overwhelmed. Well, what happens? Well, the bar exam is massive, right? Huge amount of material that can be tested. So most bar prep providers throw a ton of material at students. Makes sense, right? A lot of material can be tested. So bar prep providers get all these treatises, huge stacks of books, and they throw it at students. And then they integrate this into really complex systems and schedules, right? A lot of companies now are integrating technology. They advertise things like, AI algorithms where the schedule adapts to your performance. And there's all these different components and complexities, and you have all this material being thrown at you. What does this do? This causes that feeling of being overwhelmed to compound, right? The worst thing, in my opinion, that you can do when someone's feeling overwhelmed is throw complexity at them. When someone is overwhelmed, what you really need to do is simplify, streamline, right? The more complex something gets, the more overwhelmed a person is going to become. So naturally, what happens, we start out being overwhelmed, and then our bar prep provider kind of compounds the situation. Again, maybe and understandably, right? They're trying to help. But when you throw that much material at a student, for some students that are already overwhelmed, that level of complexity that's being thrown at them actually makes the situation worse. And what happens is for some students, they start to distrust their bar prep provider because some of the activities that are being assigned don't seem to be helping. So for different students, it could be different stuff. Maybe, you're being assigned videos or you're being assigned, to read those outlines or something. And you're doing that activity and you're like, this really doesn't feel like it's helping me. I feel like I'm wasting time doing this. Okay, and so this causes some distrust in your bar prep provider. You start to wonder, hey, is this really the best way to prepare for the bar exam? And this creates, at this moment, the next stage in the cycle is basically analysis paralysis. Students start wondering, should I continue to follow the course that's being provided to me, or should I deviate? And if I'm going to deviate, how do I deviate? Right? And this is where things start to get really bad, because now once you start to enter this analysis paralysis, you're trying to decide what you should do. There's a ton of material, tons of complexity. You're not trusting, your roadmap. Your bar prep provider is supposed to be like your roadmap through this complexity, but they've actually managed to make it more complex. And now you don't know what to do. You're trying to follow it, but a lot of things don't seem to be working. Clock is ticking, right? We're getting closer to exam day. So there's all this stuff. And what a lot of students do is they enter analysis paralysis. It's kind of like a deer in headlight. instead of taking some sort of action, they end up taking no action or very little action. Of course, then once a student starts taking less action, this is going to cause feelings of guilt and shame. Students are going to say, it's my fault. I should be doing more. I should have paid attention more in law school. And then you get into this really bad cycle where, you're feeling bad about yourself. You're beating yourself up, causes guilt and shame. And then this goes all the way back, causes us to be even more overwhelmed, because now not only are we juggling being overwhelmed by just the sheer size of the test, we're overwhelmed by all these emotions. Right now we feel bad about ourselves. We're wondering, whether we're smart enough to do this. Why can't we do what everyone else is doing, right? Because a lot of these bar prep companies also advertise pass rates that are basically based on like completion percentages, but they don't tell you how many students are like getting to those completion percentages. But the natural reaction is like, wow, look, all these students are passing the bar exam and they're getting 90% of the program complete. I'm not taking any action, right? It causes you to feel worse about yourself. And we just get into this horrible loop, right? We get into this vicious cycle. Okay, this is what we want to avoid, because that analysis paralysis and not taking any action is actually, like, by definition, the worst thing we can do. Right? If you look at any bar exam prep statistics, the more work a student does, the higher their chance is of passing. So if you get to a point where for any reason you're not doing work, that's like by definition the worst thing you can do. So we want to avoid that at all costs. We want to avoid getting into this spiral. And the thing I would start with is you have to recognize that you're going to be overwhelmed. That's not the problem. It's where you go from overwhelmed to analysis paralysis, in my opinion, because of the complexity. That's where you really start to get into these problems. So being overwhelmed is not necessarily the problem. It's when you allow that to lead to basically not taking any action, where you get so overwhelmed by all the complexity, you don't do anything. We want to avoid that. Okay, so how do you avoid that? What are the best strategies here? This is actually easy. I have an infallible strategy if we apply this correctly. So if you're in this cycle right now, don't worry, we can break it. If you're, getting ready for bar exam preparation and you think this might happen to you, this is what we do. And by the way, this is what I would recommend to every single student. It just so happens this is especially beneficial for people that are feeling overwhelmed. But I actually think from just a statistical probability perspective, this is like the most efficient way to structure your bar exam preparation. So this is what I recommend to everybody. Again, it just so happens it's especially beneficial for people that are overwhelmed. I call this strategy Groundhog Daying it. Okay, if you've seen the movie Groundhog Day, right? Guy wakes up every day and relives the same day over and over and over again. Very simple premise, right? Basically, what we want to do is Groundhog Day it with our highest yield activity. So what I would do at default, basically, whatever time you have to wake up, whatever time you're typically waking up, I would set your alarm like 2 hours earlier. Basically, you want to get up while like the whole world is still asleep, okay? And what you want to do is minimize the amount of time from when you wake up to when you start that high yield activity, like as short as possible. And when I say high yield activity, I'm talking about like whatever you think is going to help you score the most points on the bar exam. So by default, if you're not sure, I would pick like a 30 question multiple choice set, right? This statistically, from what I've seen for most students, is probably your highest yield activity. Just sitting down and working through practice questions and then reviewing those questions. So what you want to do is the night before, this requires some setup. So the night before you're going to start Groundhog Daying it, you want to set everything up. So basically in the morning when you wake up, you're going to wake up and you're going to start doing that practice question set within like 10 minutes, if possible, right? I know everyone's different. Maybe you have to whatever, right? But as short as possible. Like the goal should be you wake up and within 10 minutes, you're doing that practice question set. So you want to set everything up to avoid anything, any distraction that could break you from this chain. So like what I would do is I would take your smartphone and before you go to sleep, I'd put it in a drawer, like in another room, turn it off or put it on airplane mode and get like an analog alarm clock. So the analog alarm clock is that you don't have a phone by you when you wake up. I would take my clothes that I'm going to wear the next day, lay it by the bed. If you need any food, sustenance, I would also have that ready to go. Wherever you eat it, if you need to heat something up or whatever, like it's all ready, unpacked, ready to go. So as quickly as possible, you can get through these things. Okay, if you're like drinking coffee in the morning, hopefully you can do that at home. Like you don't have to walk anywhere to go and get that. If you can have it somehow like on a timer, so it's set up when you wake up, the coffee's ready, great. If you can just switch to another source of caffeine, like you can get water bottles that just have caffeine in it. That's actually kind of nice because you can just have that sitting by the bed. So you could just wake up, right? Make sure it's like about equivalent to the amount of caffeine you get in whatever cup of coffee you're drinking, however many milligrams of caffeine that is. And you can kind of just like chug it right when you wake up and keep going. Point is, you want to get creative, right? So that you wake up and you're doing practice questions within like 10 minutes. And then once you have a system that works, you Groundhog Day it. You literally do this Monday through Sunday every single day, over and over and over again. Okay, this has several benefits if you structure your preparation this way. The first and foremost is if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you have analysis paralysis, this like removes all guesswork. It gives you one simple task that you're going to get done basically no matter what. It's infallible and it's a very high yield activity. Like if you do this every day, a lot of those questions, you're going to see similar stuff on the bar exam. That's going to increase your chances of passing every single morning that you apply this strategy. It also has the effect for a lot of students, kind of when you first wake up, hopefully you're not overly groggy, but you're probably a little bit groggy, right? You're kind of waking up. Your brain isn't maybe moving at like full speed where those intrusive thoughts, like as the day progresses, those intrusive thoughts can get kind of worse and worse. But when you first wake up, it's almost like you're beating your brain to like talking yourself out of it. Right? You're just like sitting down and doing practice questions before you can even think, should I do this? Should I not do this? It's like just getting to it before you can talk yourself out of it. And again, it's a really high yield activity. And then what's going to happen is like naturally, you're just going to start building confidence because you're starting your day with a big win every single day. So you're going to start to feel good about yourself. So if you're in that vicious cycle that kind of ends with like guilt and shame, you feel like you're not doing enough or all that stuff that you shouldn't beat yourself up on at all because it's really not your fault. But if you are feeling that way, this is like the easiest auto correction because immediately you're going to start feeling really good about yourself. It's like, no, I'm doing this every single morning. So from my experience, this works really well. And then you can just view the rest of your day as bonus time. If you can get other stuff done, great. If you can't, great. Doesn't matter. You completed a great activity, a great improvement in your chances of passing the bar exam every single day because you're just Groundhog Daying it. But the key to success on this is you have to remove distractions. You can't check social media. You can't check your phone. You can't check the internet. Like it should all be laid out and set up. So literally you just wake up, you walk over and you're just doing practice questions. Right? If there's anything in that chain from the time you wake up to when you start that can distract you, that can move you off your steps, your chain to getting this activity done, it'll throw the whole thing off. It won't work. So you have to kind of ruthlessly remove any possible distraction. And so like if you're in a household with a lot of people and you have to wake up before everyone else wakes up, so it's a quiet environment where you're not going to get distracted, that's just what you have to do. You might have to wake up at 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., before everyone else gets up, whatever it takes to put yourself in a position though, where you can wake up and within like 10 minutes be doing practice questions. From my experience, it's almost infallible if you can pull it off. It doesn't mean you're going to pass the bar exam, right? Of course, no one can guarantee that. I mean, it's infallible in making sure that you're completing a really important task every single day, which I think is probably like the best position you can put yourself in, which is all anyone can ask. Right? So that's the first thing I would do. Groundhog Day. So the first thing is we understand what the spiral looks like, how we go from being overwhelmed to like analysis paralysis to like not doing work. Like that's the worst thing we can do. So we avoid that. One of the best ways to avoid it is Groundhog Daying it. The next thing I would point out if you're feeling overwhelmed is basically using data to prioritize your bar prep. So everybody should, below this video, we'll have a link. Click on that link and download our frequency guide. It lays out on the MBE. So if you're taking the multiple choice portion of the bar exam, the MBE, it's going to give you a distribution of questions, basically how many questions per topic you can expect. And you'll see in each subject, there are higher yielding topics. Okay, same thing on the essay portion. Each subject, it's going to break down what the most tested topics are in each subject. You want to go through that. You want to read that guide. You want to understand what's most frequently tested, what yields the most points. Because the bar exam, again, it covers so much material and so much material is being thrown at you. You have to find a way, in my opinion, to condense that down. You need some kind of attack outline. And the best way to build attack outlines to condense your preparation, to get efficient, to streamline is to use the data. What yields me the most points on the bar exam? Those are the things you want to prioritize and focus on. And we have that all really cleanly laid out. It's totally free. You just click that, download it. You'll have all that information. I would absolutely do that. And in that document, you'll see some samples and things. Obviously, if you need an attack outline, we integrate that all into our own attack outline. It's really well constructed. It gives you all the model answer rule statements, explanations. It's all prioritized, color coded, so you can see, like, for every rule statement, this is how often it's tested. If it's tested, this is what you do. It's all broken down, all laid out. We have video courses broken up around that as well, like our Bar Blitz video series, which you can preview for free on YouTube, focuses on the most frequently tested, highest yielding topics. So we have like video crash courses, outlines. All of that, though, is built around that frequency guide. So that's where you start. You download that for free, and that's going to show you the distributions, what you can actually expect to be tested on the bar exam. Super important. I would get that. It's totally for free. And then you can decide if you want to use that information to build your own materials. Maybe you want to make your own attack outline. Maybe you want to look at what other companies are doing, right? Whatever. But I would start there so you at least have that data so you can begin to streamline. Okay, because if you don't streamline your preparation at all, like I don't even know how, like, you cannot be overwhelmed. If you're just trying to, study every topic equally, well, there's so much that could be tested. Like, you have to pick and choose places to prioritize. And I think people do, but you want to be as efficient as possible there. You don't want to just be like guessing. You want to actually look at the data and make as informed decisions as possible in terms of what's most likely to help me score points on this thing. Okay, and you use the data to do that. So I would recommend that. That's my last note here. I would say my big 3 takeaways from this video, if you're feeling overwhelmed. Number 1, it's okay to be overwhelmed. The bar exam is massive, right? There's a huge amount of material. You don't have a lot of time to study for it. You're going to be overwhelmed. It's okay to be overwhelmed. We don't want to allow being overwhelmed, though, to affect how we study. We don't want that to cause analysis paralysis, which can lead us to not taking any action or little action that can really affect how many points we score on the bar exam. So it's okay to be overwhelmed, but don't allow yourself to get into those spirals if possible. Okay, the best strategy I have, if you're kind of feeling that, or you definitely want to avoid it, Groundhog Day it. We went through that. I think that's one of the most infallible ways to ensure we're consistently completing high yield activities every day. Last thing I would point out is streamline your preparation, prioritize your preparation, focus on the highest yielding topics in each subject using the data. Link is below if you want to download that. With that is everything I wanted to cover in this video. Hope it was informative. But until then, guys, I do wish you all the absolute best, and I'll see you at our next lesson.